My family ignored me, my whole life while spoiling my sister with everything. But when I won $500,000 in the lottery, they demanded I give it all to her. I responded and left them speechless. I'm 26 years old. I run my own children's clothing business, and I need to tell this story because for years I thought I was the one who was crazy. You know, like, maybe I was the problem, or I was exaggerating everything in my head. But no, it's real. And what happened these last few months basically confirmed that I wasn't imagining anything. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I was a kid and started noticing that something didn't add up in my house. I grew up with my parents and my younger sister Victoria in a medium-sized town in the United States. Nothing special, like houses with yards and decent public schools. For as long as I can remember, I mean literally since I can remember things. My parents always treated Victoria and me differently. It wasn't subtle either. It was obvious to anyone who paid attention. My room was basic, white walls, a bed, a desk they bought at a garage sale, while Victoria's room looked like something out of a decorating magazine, with pretty patterned wallpaper, new furniture they bought from expensive stores, and toys everywhere. I had like 5 or 6 toys total that I got for Christmas or birthdays, and she had so many, she didn't even play with all of them because more kept coming every week. Birthdays were the worst part, honestly. When I turned 10, my parents made me a box cake from the supermarket, sang happy birthday to me quickly before leaving for work, and gave me some generic colored pencils in a plastic bag. Look, don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting a huge party or anything, but when Victoria turned 10 2 years later, my parents literally rented ponies, brought a clown, invited her whole class, made a 3-tier cake from an expensive bakery, and gave her like 10 gifts wrapped in shiny paper with giant bows. I remember standing there watching the whole spectacle and thinking, seriously? Are we really just going to pretend this is normal? But I never said anything because, I don't know, I guess. Part of me still hoped things would change, that maybe when I grew up a bit more, my parents would start treating me the same. Spoiler alert, things didn't change. In fact, they got worse. In middle school and high school, I kept noticing the favoritism in everything. Victoria always had new clothes from expensive brands. I wore the same Walmart shirt like 3 times a week. She went to ballet classes, piano, French, whatever she wanted. My parents paid for everything without blinking. I asked them once if I could take guitar lessons because I liked music, and my dad told me we didn't have money for that. Literally told me that while signing the check for Victoria's horseback riding lessons that cost like double. In that moment, something broke inside me. You know, like I finally accepted that. For them, I simply wasn't a priority, and never would be. The graduations were the last straw, the moment where everything became more than clear to everyone. When I graduated from high school, my parents did absolutely nothing special. They gave me $50 in a white envelope with a card that said something generic like, "Congratulations on your achievement," without a signature or anything personal, and that was it. No special dinner, no family gathering, nothing. They took a quick photo of me in the cap and gown and went home because they had things to do. 2 years later, Victoria graduated from high school, and my parents threw a huge party in the yard, invited like 50 people, set up tables with fancy tablecloths, hired catering, and best of all, they bought her a new car, a bright red 2018 Honda Civic, with a giant bow on top parked in front of the house for everyone to see. I was standing there with my plate of food watching Victoria jump with excitement and hug them while everyone applauded, and honestly, I wanted to disappear. You know what it feels like to see that when you got $50 2 years earlier? It feels horrible. Telling you in front of everyone that you're not worth as much as your sister. College was more of the same, but amplified. I applied to several universities and got into a decent state school like 2 hours from home. When my acceptance letter arrived and I showed it to my parents, my mom said something like, "Oh, that's nice, Brandon," without looking up from her phone, and my dad just nodded and kept watching TV. They didn't even ask what I was going to study or when classes started. They literally didn't care. When Victoria received her acceptance letter from a prestigious university 2 years later, and I'm talking about one of those universities with a name everyone recognizes, my parents opened a bottle of champagne, called all the relatives to tell them, put the letter framed in the living room like it was a diploma or something, and threw another party to celebrate it. The difference was so obvious that even some aunts and uncles started commenting among themselves. I heard them, murmuring things like, "Poor Brandon," or "Those parents are messed up in the head," but nobody said anything directly to my parents because, well, that's family, right? Nobody wants to cause drama. I graduated from college after 4 years working part-time and studying full-time, paying most of my expenses myself because my parents basically gave me the minimum help possible. I got my first real job like 2 weeks after graduating. Nothing extraordinary. An administrative position at a medium-sized company with a decent salary that allowed me to live in a small apartment and pay my bills. I thought I was finally starting my independent life, that I could distance myself a bit from all that toxic family dynamic and focus on myself. But no. Turns out my parents had other plans for my money. Like a month after getting the job, my mom called me and said they needed to talk to me about something important. I went to the house thinking maybe someone was sick or something bad had happened, but no. When I arrived, both my parents were there, sitting in the living room with Victoria, all serious, and my dad told me that now that I had a stable job, it was my responsibility to start saving money to help with Victoria's future. I mean, they specifically told me I should save money for her eventual wedding, for her college graduation that was still like 2 years away, for anything she needed. I told them they were joking, right? But they weren't joking. My mom explained very seriously that as the older brother, it was my duty to support my sister, because they had already spent a lot of money on her education and needed my help. Victoria was sitting there saying nothing, looking at her phone as if this conversation wasn't about her, like completely disconnected from how absurd all this was. I left that house so angry I almost crashed the car like 3 times on the way back to my apartment. I decided in that moment that I was going to minimize contact with them as much as I could. I kept going to obligatory family dinners from time to time to not cause a giant scandal. But I basically started distancing myself emotionally, answered their messages with monosyllables, made up excuses not to go to family events, that kind of thing. Like 6 months passed like that, with this superficial relationship where I made the minimum necessary effort to keep up appearances, but without really getting involved with them. And then something happened that changed absolutely everything. I bought a lottery ticket one day because, I don't know, I was bored waiting in line at the supermarket and there was a machine there. I had never bought one before. Honestly, I'm not one of those people who play the lottery regularly or anything like that, but that day, I bought one for $5 and threw it in the car and completely forgot about it. Like a week later, I was cleaning the car and found the crumpled ticket under the passenger seat, and out of curiosity, I looked up the winning numbers on my phone while waiting for my coffee to heat up in the morning. I almost had a heart attack when I saw the numbers matched perfectly. All 6 numbers, one by one. I won $500,000, literally $500,000 on a $5 ticket I almost threw in the trash. The first thing I did, and this was stupid in retrospect, but in the moment, it seemed right, was call my parents to tell them. I think part of me still had that childish hope that maybe this huge news would bring us together as a family, that maybe they would be genuinely happy for me and we could have a nice moment together. I went to their house that same afternoon, gathered everyone in the living room, and told them I had won the lottery. My parents were silent for like 10 seconds processing the information, and then my mom started screaming with excitement, and my dad hugged me tight. And for a moment, I thought maybe things were going to change, that maybe I was finally going to have a normal relationship with them. That illusion lasted exactly 15 minutes. After the initial excitement, my parents started making plans out loud about what to do with the money, and when I say making plans, I mean making plans for Victoria's money, not for me. My dad said this was an incredible blessing because now Victoria could go to her dream graduate program in Europe that cost like $150,000 a year. And my mom added that they could also buy her a new apartment closer to her current university, and that they could renovate her room again because she had mentioned she wanted a different style. Victoria was sitting there smiling as if it was already her money, making comments about which European city she would like best and what kind of apartment she wanted. I let them talk for like 5 more minutes before interrupting them and telling them that was my money and I was going to decide what to do with it. The room went completely silent, like awkward silence where you can hear the wall clock ticking. My dad looked at me with a face I had never seen on him, a mix of shock and anger, and told me I was being incredibly selfish. That family shares these moments of fortune, that it was my responsibility as an older brother to take care of Victoria and make sure she had everything she needed to succeed in life. My mom started crying, literal dramatic tears running down her cheeks, saying she couldn't believe I was being so cruel to my own sister, that how could I deny her this opportunity to study in Europe when I knew how much it meant to her. I explained as calmly as I could, although inside I was boiling, that I had never received even a fraction of the support they had given Victoria all her life. That for years they had treated me like a second-class citizen in my own family, that I had paid for most of my college myself while they completely paid for hers without blinking, that they hadn't even celebrated my achievements, while throwing huge parties for anything Victoria did. I told them that with that money I was going to pursue my own dreams, that I had wanted to start my own business for years but had never had the initial capital, and that now I finally had the opportunity to make it happen. My dad stood up and told me, and I remember this word for word because it stuck with me. He said, "You have 1 week to think about it carefully, Brandon. And if you don't do the right thing with that money, then we don't need to have you in this family." Victoria was sitting there looking uncomfortable for the first time in the whole conversation, but she didn't say anything in my defense either. Didn't say, "No, Dad, it's his money," or "Let him do what he wants." She just stayed quiet looking at the floor. My mom added that if I chose to be so selfish, then they were going to have to reconsider their relationship with me, because a real family supports each other in important moments. I stood up, told them I didn't need a week to think about it because my decision was already made, and left that house. During the drive back to my apartment, I started shaking. I don't know if from anger or adrenaline or what, but my hands were gripping the steering wheel tight, and I felt like I was going to explode. When I got to my apartment, I sat on the couch for like an hour, just processing everything that had happened, wondering if I was really being selfish like they said, or if I had the right to use my own money for my own dreams. 3 days passed without anyone contacting me, and then I received a long text message from my mom, basically giving me an ultimatum. It said that if I didn't transfer the money for Victoria's program in Europe before the weekend, then they didn't want to hear from me again. That I had chosen money over family, and they had to protect Victoria from my negative influence. I read that message like 5 times because I couldn't believe my own parents were telling me this, but there it was, in text, impossible to misinterpret. I didn't respond to the message. Instead, I started looking for new apartments, because technically, I still had some things at my parents' house stored in the garage, and I knew I needed to get them out before they threw them away, or something worse. I went one day when I knew they weren't there, put everything in my car in 2 trips, and moved completely into my apartment. I blocked my parents' and Victoria's numbers, blocked all their social media, basically cut them completely out of my life. Some relatives contacted me asking what had happened because apparently my parents told them their version of the story, where I was the villain, denying his sister the opportunity of her life, but I didn't go into details with anyone. I just told them there were irreconcilable differences and left it at that. With the lottery money, I started my business, something I had dreamed of doing for years but never had the resources. I always liked fashion and specifically had this idea of creating a line of dresses for little girls, something unique and quality that wasn't too formal or too casual, like that perfect middle point for birthdays, family gatherings, school photos, that kind of event. I hired a freelance designer who helped me create the first designs, found manufacturers who could make the clothes with good quality at reasonable price, created an online store with a professional website, and started selling. The first few months were tough, I'm not gonna lie. There were days where I only sold 1 or 2 dresses and thought maybe I had made a huge mistake, but I kept trying, improving the product photos, adjusting prices, promoting on social media. 3 months after moving out and cutting contact with my family, my mom started sending me messages from a new number I hadn't blocked. I guess someone from the extended family gave her my number. The messages were super casual at first, like, "Hi Brandon, how are you?" and "We miss you at home," as if nothing had happened. I completely ignored them. After like a week of messages I didn't answer, she finally sent one saying the real reason she was contacting me. Turns out they needed me to lend them money for Victoria's program in London because they hadn't saved enough, and the deadline to pay registration was approaching. They were asking for like $100,000, just casual like that, as if it was normal to ask your son who you just kicked out of the family 3 months ago to lend you 6 figures. I responded for the first time and told them, no, period. I wasn't going to lend them a single cent. My mom called me immediately, like 5 times in a row until I answered, and started begging, crying for me to please reconsider, that Victoria was going to lose this opportunity because of me, that how could I be so cruel? I told her they were the ones who gave me the ultimatum. They were the ones who told me they didn't want me in their family, and that, now I was simply respecting their decision. I hung up and blocked that number too. After that, I blocked like 10 more numbers they used to try to contact me. Numbers from aunts, cousins, even a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be from a neighbor of my parents, who was doing them the favor of calling me. Eventually, they stopped trying. I quit my office job like 6 months after starting the business because I was already making enough money from sales to live comfortably, and I wanted to dedicate myself full-time to growing the company. I opened a physical boutique in a small but decent shopping center, hired 2 part-time employees to help with sales and inventory, and things started going really well. I had regular customers who came back every season to buy new dresses for their daughters, other customers who referred me to their friends, and online sales kept growing every month. Honestly, I felt proud of myself. I felt like I had finally achieved something important, without the help or approval of my parents. The boutique had been open for like 4 months when something happened that I didn't expect at all. One of my employees called me early on a Saturday, super upset, telling me I needed to come to the store immediately because there was a serious problem. I arrived in 15 minutes, and when I walked in, I found the police there, and turns out they had arrested someone for stealing money from the cash register. The employee who opened on Saturdays had noticed that like $300 were missing when she did the cash count at the end of the previous day, checked the security cameras, and clearly saw someone taking money from the register when the store was empty. She called the police. They came to review the cameras and identified the person who worked part-time at the boutique next door. But here comes the incredible part. When the cops went to arrest that person at the other boutique and told her why, she told them it wasn't her, but her coworker. They brought both of them, reviewed the cameras more carefully with better resolution, and discovered that indeed there were 2 people involved, and one of them was Victoria. My sister, Victoria, had been working part-time at that boutique next door for like 2 months. I had no idea because we hadn't talked in almost a year, and apparently she saw the opportunity to steal from my business and took it along with her coworker. The cops asked me if I wanted to press charges, and honestly, I was paralyzed for like 5 minutes, not knowing what to say. Victoria was there in handcuffs, crying, saying she was so sorry, that she needed the money, that please don't get her in trouble. Part of me felt sorry seeing her like that, but another part, the part that had suffered years of neglect and favoritism, was furious. I told the cops that yes, I wanted to press charges, signed the necessary papers, and Victoria was officially arrested for theft. Like 2 hours later, my mom called me from another new number, hysterical, screaming how dare I have my own sister arrested, that I was a monster, that Victoria was in jail because of me. I told her Victoria was in jail because of her own decisions, that she chose to steal from my business, and that I was simply protecting what was mine. My dad took the phone and started demanding I drop the charges immediately, that I was going to ruin Victoria's future with a criminal record, that I needed to think about family. I told them that for years they didn't think about me when they ignored me, when they treated me as less than Victoria, when they basically kicked me out of the family for not giving them my money, and that now I had no obligation to think about them. I hung up. But the following days were horrible. I'm not gonna lie. My parents called me from like 20 different numbers, sent me messages, even showed up at my apartment knocking on the door for hours until I threatened to call the police. They told me they needed money for Victoria's bail, that it cost like $10,000, and they needed money for a lawyer because they couldn't afford one and the public defender wasn't good enough according to them. I told them it wasn't my problem and to stop contacting me. But they kept trying. Every day was something new. Long voicemails from my mom crying, text messages from my dad alternating between pleas and threats. It was emotionally exhausting. After like 2 weeks of this constant harassment, I finally agreed to meet with them at a neutral cafe to talk. They both arrived looking horrible, like they hadn't slept well in days, and immediately started asking me to help with bail and the lawyer. I told them I was willing to pay bail one time as a final favor, but with conditions. I told them I was going to pay the bail bondsman directly. I wasn't going to give the money to them, and that after that, I didn't want them to contact me ever again unless it was to sincerely apologize for everything they had done for years. My mom started crying right there in the cafe, but this time they seemed like real tears, not the manipulative tears from before. My dad stayed quiet for like a full minute and then said something I never thought I'd hear from him. He said, "You're right, Brandon. We treated you horribly your whole life, and there's no excuse for that." My mom added between sobs that they had realized these last few months how much damage they had done by favoring Victoria so much, that they had created a monster who thought everything should be handed to her without working for it, and that they deeply regretted being so blind for so many years. I'm not going to pretend that conversation magically fixed everything, because it didn't. There was too much built-up resentment on my part to forgive decades of neglect with an apology, but it was a start, I guess. I told them I needed time to process everything, that I was willing to pay bail because at the end of the day, Victoria was still my sister despite everything. But that rebuilding a relationship with them was going to take a lot of work on their part. Not just words, but real actions that showed things had changed. I paid the $10,000 bail directly to the agent as I promised. Victoria got out of jail, and my parents sent me a long message, thanking me and repeating their apologies. I responded briefly, telling them it was fine, but I needed space. During the following weeks, they kept sending occasional but respectful messages, asking how I was, sending pictures of the family dog I had always liked, that kind of small thing that showed they were trying without being invasive. Like 2 months after the arrest incident, my parents invited me to dinner at their house. They said they wanted to talk more about everything and that they understood if I said no, but the invitation was there. I thought a lot about whether to go or not. Like I spent a whole week debating it with myself, but in the end, I decided maybe it was worth trying to see if they had really changed. I went to the dinner and it was weird. I'm not gonna lie, super awkward at first with forced conversation about the weather and trivial things, but eventually we started talking about deeper things. My dad asked me about my business and really listened when I told him about sales and expansion plans. My mom asked me how my mental health was after everything that had happened, and for the first time in my life, I felt like they genuinely cared about how I was as a person, not just as Victoria's older brother who existed in the background. Victoria wasn't at that dinner. Apparently, she was in her room, and honestly, I was glad not to have to see her because I still wasn't ready for that level of awkwardness. We've been doing these family dinners like once a month since then. We've had like 4 or 5 now, and little by little things have been improving. We're nowhere near having a normal relationship yet. There's too much history for that. But there's progress. My parents really seem to be trying to treat me differently. They ask about my life, show genuine interest in the business. They even came to the boutique once to buy a dress for a friend's daughter, which was weird, but appreciated. Victoria and I have barely talked directly. We see each other from a distance at these family dinners, but we haven't had a real conversation about what happened. I know she's going to therapy now because my parents mentioned it to me, and that she's working a regular job and paying her part of the legal expenses with her own money. I don't know if we'll ever have a normal sibling relationship. Honestly, I'm not sure I want that. But I guess we're at a point where we can exist in the same space without it being completely horrible. My business keeps growing. I opened a second boutique last month in a bigger mall. Online sales doubled this last quarter, and I'm considering hiring someone to handle the administrative side because it's already too much work to do alone. I feel proud of what I've built, and best of all is I did it without their help, without their approval, just with my own effort and that stroke of lottery luck that I decided to use for myself instead of handing it all over like they wanted. Last week, my dad told me something during one of our dinners that took me by surprise. He told me he was proud of me, that I had done something incredible with the business, and that he regretted not telling me that before, that he regretted all the years where they never celebrated my achievements. I didn't know what to say, honestly. I just sat there chewing my food, processing those words because never in my life had I heard my dad say he was proud of me. I just nodded and said thanks, and we kept eating. But those words stuck with me, and I guess they mean something even though they came like 20 years late. I don't know if I'll ever completely forgive them for everything. That happened. For all the ignored birthdays, for all the times they made me feel invisible in my own family, for that horrible ultimatum they gave me when I refused to give them my money. But I'm trying. I'm giving them the chance to prove they really want to change and really regret it. If they fail, if they go back to the old patterns, then I already know I can live without them. I already did it for almost a year, and survived, even thrived. But if they've really changed, if these monthly dinners become something genuine over time, then maybe it's worth trying to rebuild some of what we should have had from the beginning.